Hey there, in this skill builder video, I'm going to show you how you can grade your quilt seams so you get flatter quilts. So flatter quilts are easier to piece and quilt. Grading seams is a trick both advanced quilt makers and beginning quilt makers can use to reduce bulky seams like this one. So here for this seam in this intersection, you can see there's a lot of fabric coming together at this point where all these blocks intersect. But the trick here is it's usually best to grade your seams before you get to this point. So you want to grade your seams even before you sew your blocks together. So I'm going to show you how I grade my seams by grading a couple of quilt blocks. So I'm going to show you how I grade my seams for this modern triangle and for this modern triangle as well. So you can see for this quilt block, if I were to sew all of these together, there would be a lot of fabric coming here. So I'm going to show you how to grade this quilt block as well. All right, so first I'm going to show you how I grade my seams using this quilt block. So I'll turn it over, and with some sharp, small snips, I am going to grade these seam allowances here. So I'm going to grab my green seam allowance, and I am just going to trim that seam allowance so it's a different width than the other seam allowance. So normally I'm sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And the trick is just to make the fabrics have different widths of seam allowances so they're not all coming together at the same point in your seam, right? So I'm going to flip it over here. And I noticed that my seam allowance is already a different width until it gets to the end. So I'm just going to come through and just trim that seam allowance here. So really, that is all there is to it. Grading your seams means making sure your seam allowances have different widths of seam allowances. And then for my next example, I want to show you this block. This block has more, it's a little bit more complicated because there's 2 seams here. So you can see there's 2 seams coming together at that point. And so here's how I would grade these seam allowances. So for this one, I would need to unpick a couple of seams of stitches, and then I'm going to trim this pink seam allowance on the right. And so now on the right, my pink seam allowance is a different width than my black seam allowance here. And I'm kind of raising that seam allowance with my thumb here so you can really see it. And then I would repeat the process on the other side. And I would need to unpick a couple of stitches, probably just one. And then once I have that stitch picked, then I will come through and trim this pink seam allowance just a bit. And now I have all my seam allowances are different widths. So just by grading your seams like that, I can already feel there's less fabric for this point. So that is it. That is how you grade your seams. And as you continue sewing your blocks together, you can continue grading additional seams. So that's really it. That is how you grade your seams so you can get flatter quilts and your quilter will thank you. All right, subscribe for more skill builder tips. And if you'd like to learn more about my modern triangle quilts, go to makemoderntriangles.com for more information. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.